That was pretty much perfect.
Perfect.
Yeah, that was fastest.
All right. Let's have a look at that. And the one before that was fat. Yeah.
The one before that was thin, and the one before that was fat. So it went solid, fat, thin, solid.
For some reason, so when I start, just a basic assessment, you want to look at what's your dominant ground reaction force pattern. Yours is vertical. They see
Right.
it fits into the 2 hours, the other two don't quite. And then you want to look at the maximal pressure shift into the trail side, which is 76.
Okay.
So that's a decent match because I always say 80% is a kind of a centered pressure shift.
Right.
That means you need a lot of torque. Once you get 85, 90 or more, then you need a lot of lateral to make that work. As you stay below 80, you would need a lot of vertical. That's
Okay.
kind of a more stacked on top of it swing.
Yeah.
So let's just see what happened in the chunked one. So in the chunked one,
Get a
you
little
get
more
80.
to the right. I get 80.
And
It's kind of what I
much
suspected
vertical.
too.
So,
Yeah.
And I think that's what every time I've ever worked with you, that's kind of what we've been working on.
Yeah.
Is not getting as far into the trail side.
Right.
Now, what I've been working on recently is talking about kind of the net plane that the club gets on with people and trying to match the ground reaction forces to that. So if I take you to the top, I mean, that's a pretty steep, I draw a line down the left arm and call it kind of the net plane. So somewhere from here, you're gonna have to get that ball or that club on the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And your hands are above your head, they're pretty
Right.
high.
Right.
Which means, because when we swing a club, we're basically moving the club in a combination of a transverse plane and a frontal plane.
Right.
And so the higher you get your hands, the closer that's going to get to the frontal plane, the deeper you get your hands, the closer you're going to get
Transverse.
to the
Gotcha.
plane. And so if we look at the forces, like this is the frontal plane right here, and the forces that occur in the frontal plane are the medial lateral forces, or side to side, which is this one. And then there's the up and down, the vertical forces that occur in this plane.
Right.
And so for a lead side dominant player, we really want to manipulate this variable to try to make the club get momentum and to do the things we need it to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the frontal plane, so let me put the vectors up on here. This process is going here. All right, so in the frontal plane, essentially I think of it as there's two kind of sets of golfers that would need to use the frontal plane moment effectively. Really rear leg dominant like me, when I get 85 or 90,
Yeah.
then I got to use a lot of this horizontal force,
Right.
which is in the frontal plane, and then I got to use a lot of this vertical force. A front side dominant person doesn't really need a lot of this, but needs this to be functioning properly. And so if you look right here, let me go to one camera. There we go. So right about here ish is where you probably create your maximal frontal plane moment. And for now, we don't have our center of mass yet. So I just draw
Just assume,
a little
yeah.
circle somewhere around your belly button.
Yeah.
So let's say that's your center of mass. What you're doing here is you're creating a moment. So if I extend that line up a little bit, the perpendicular distance between your center of mass and where that net vector is will be your moment arm distance.
Okay.
And the more you can lengthen that,
Right.
the more kind of energy you're putting
Yeah.
into the system.
Gotcha.
And you're a little inefficient with it because what I like to see with this is where this minimum happens here, which is right here. So you're kind of unweighting yourself. So you only weigh 72% of your body weight right here. I want that to match with the peak horizontal force, because obviously the easiest way to make this as long as possible is to make the horizontal force as long as possible and the vertical force as low as possible.
Right.
Because that's going to give you a net vector like this, and then your moment arm is going to be like massive. So the more we can get more, well, if your only goal is to maximize your frontal plane moment, you would want to push as hard as you can laterally, it's like create a ton of lateral force, and then unweight vertically as much as possible.
Gotcha.
Now, as a lead leg dominant player, I don't like the strategy of trying to add more of this
Right.
for you, but I do like the strategy of lining this up with this a little bit more, because if I can line this little, whatever this is, a 11%. So you have 2 more percent vertical here, or horizontal, but you're only at 81% here. And so having this 11% line up with this 72 would make you more efficient.
Gotcha.
In terms of, and that's where I think like effortless speed kind of comes from. And this is the one you chunked too, so
Yeah.
it was slower. So let's see this one, if you did a little better job of that. So this one, you actually unweighted a little bit more. And so now you got to 72% unweighted, or 70% unweighting, and you're at 9% horizontal, so you're getting a pretty decent moment into the system there. And so generally, if I have a lead leg dominant player, I'm going to work with verticals to try to make this more efficient.
Right.
And so there is something in your pattern here. See how shaky this is when you try to unweight? Because unweighting is like an eccentric move. It's like a kind of a downward, right, stretching of muscles, which takes some pretty serious neural activation to make it work. And you have a couple of freakouts here in that. And so I would probably, this is something that we would try to work on in the gym, doing some more eccentric work to try to see if we can smooth that out and be able to get a little bit more lowering. Now, the other part of it is where we have to decelerate. So here, let me do this again, I don't know why this goes away. Here's where you're putting the moment in the system. So here's your belt buckle or your belly button. Here's the, turn it up, so then here's your moment arm distance. So there's your moment arm distance for right now. And so what this is doing, obviously if that's your center mass there and I'm pushing up here, I'm giving this whole system momentum like this, right?
Right.
But really, this is you pushing into the ground, because this is measuring what you're doing to the ground. So basically, this is you pushing into the ground and giving your body momentum.
Right.
Creating that. And so I think what's super important, which a lot of people aren't talking about, is being able to transfer that momentum from your body to the club requires a braking aspect.
Yeah.
And what I like to see is when this positive vertical force happens here, so when you get to your max vertical force, I want to see this negative horizontal force be a little almost matching, so see how you're still pushing positive?
Yeah.
And so that's not giving you as much braking action. Because if you look here, like if your center of mass is like right here, you're still trying to speed up your body here. So see how this is on the right side of that?
Right.
If you had this negative happen at the same time and this green arrow was like back here slightly, like this, now that arrow is trying to give your, it's trying to sling the club back into a backswing direction.
Yeah, I got you.
Which means it's breaking your body's momentum and transferring the energy into the club. So the most efficient frontal plane people I see have peak positive occurring with the negative here, and that's when they're putting that energy in the system, and this negative occurring with the peak positive.
With the peak positive, I got you.
There's a kid. Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, generally, frontal plane people, especially when they produce a lot of horizontal force to create their frontal plane stuff, that generally really shallows it and creates a rightward swing direction. But you don't have a lot of horizontal force to shallow it, so then we got to work in here. So the club will be a little steeper, which is fine. I don't mind that. And so I think the two places I would go with you is
that backswing.
The backswing. Well, when you get kind of near the top, it's the lowering. So you can see you kind of start doing it right here.
Is it I'm like lifting or?
No, this is a lowering of your center of mass. So as your center of mass goes down, that unweights the ground. And so it's from this left knee kind of flexing. And what I find with a lot of people that are like kind of lead side dominant, a feeling of getting taller kind of through here. And then, because if you get taller, now you have room to go down.
Right.
Because if you're already down, you can't really go down anymore. You can see where that can get a little blitz.
Okay, that makes sense.
And a good cue that a lot of people like to make that taller thing happen is the thoracic extension. So trying to get this animal on your shirt to point at the ceiling.
No, it's perfect because that makes sense when I look at my swing face on, and I almost stay in flexion too much, and my head has that slight rightward shift.
Yeah.
So that thoracic extension is going to get me
Yeah.
a little more centered at the top too.
Exactly. And then it'll probably prevent too much shift into the right
Yeah.
side, which
Yeah.
is, I think, where the chunk come from. Well,
Yeah,
we saw the
probably.
chunk
Yeah,
here.
100%.
This, I mean, and it's crazy. It's not that much of a difference, but like getting 80% into your trail side for you with the minimum amount of
Minimum
lateral
laterals,
force that you
yeah.
have is a chunk waiting to
Yeah.
happen. Whereas, and I would say like 75, now you're fine. Like this
Right.
lateral force gets to a low point where you need it. And I would say like with wedges, especially, like you almost, I would try to feel like stacked.
Yeah, so one of the things, actually Tyler and I were talking about it, that like he took a video of my face on when we played Goose Creek a couple weeks ago. I have this little, like I feel like I'm literally doing like a stack and tilt bowler drill when I hit the shot, but since I have both feet, on the ground, I have this like really big reverse hip slide. I think there's a little bit of that that's causing my upper center to be behind it more, and that still causes some of the chunks where I need to get almost a thoracic extension where I feel like I'm leaning left and I have maybe like a little more stacked up on top of my centers would be a bit
I like
better.
that idea. That's, that makes a tons of sense. And then I think if you feel that kind of get tall and thoracic extension, then the hypothesis of some of this blip might be going away.
Okay.
That blip could be you, like, because you're staying so much in flexion, like, and you try to go down, there's nowhere to go really, and you're kind of like,
makes sense.
so that's where I would go. So this is kind of how I look at it. I always kind of decide whether, first of all, whether they're kind of a frontal plane player, which means I look at these two graphs, or if they're a transverse plane player, like a rotational player, I look at this graph, which is the torque graph. And the torque graph, if they are a transverse plane player, like, so if these two aren't very efficient and they're a very centered player, then I'd want their hands deeper.
Right.
Because they generally would have none of this.
Yeah.
And that's a shallower, so you just got to get it shallow already to start with.
Absolutely.
And this generally is kind of like the torque is a little bit of a steepener, so getting them, and then, once I figure out what they are, I keep the torque up here, and then I'll look at these toe heel forces. Y. And then the right and left foot separately to see how efficient they are. And that is actually pretty good.
Yeah, those are feels just like always, I'm pretty familiar with.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not tough at all for me. I don't know if I can hit a solid shot, but
Yeah, well, it'll take a couple of them. Let me look at the timing, because the thought of when this should happen really depends on the timing of your vertical. Let's see when it is. I mean, you did it. That was maybe overdone a bit, because you're only 54% off the ball now.
okay. Now, would there be, with that same feel, almost letting my center of mass, or like my belt buckle get a little bit more right, like a Colin Montgomery kind of thing?
Yeah,
Like,
you can. I mean, this is where we have to work out for you. Like, I mean, if your goal is not to chunk it ever, like that was thin, wasn't it?
yeah, a little thin.
Yeah. I would do that. Like if you're under the gun, and you're on the last hole and there's water short, like you can get away
Do
from
that,
it.
yeah. That's kind of what I mean, like with the wedges, where it's like, okay, if I get the lower center farther right and the upper body more left, it's going to stack and stay on top. And that path's still like, I mean, I know it's not set up perfectly straight, but it was 1.3 out to in.
Okay.
Angle attacks 4 degrees down, like not
crazy.
terrible.
And like your verticals are not super, like we want them by club parallel.
Yeah.
Greg Rose like to have them by club vertical, so you're kind of right in the middle. So the timing of them is good. And so you can think about like, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of the really aggressive down.
Yeah, I feel so I want to get the thoracic extension almost like that, a little Colin Montgomery feel, and I really have to push hard
Down and back up.
down and back up this way. Yeah. I think I can add both those together here. Definitely more verticals. I'm not sure about the.
How was the strike? Sounded good.
Yeah, I was okay.
Wow, that definitely is more vertical. It's good that you can feel that.
Yeah,
And look at the down. See how much smoother.
yeah. So that's like the feel was. And this is always where I get into a little bit of trouble when I get away and I get on my own. And that was like faster, 2 miles an hour faster too.
Yeah.
But then I started going to practice and I just can't find the contact. I'm like, well, shit, I'll just go back to doing what I know I could hit it solid and shoot like 72 with the old stuff, but I'm pretty much stuck there. Where it's like I'm not going to get, you know, the distance back that I want.
Yeah. Well, this is what I've found, like, especially with my game being, you know, having played 3 times in a year.
Yeah.
But I would say probably, I don't know, 2 times a month after a session here, I'll hit 10 balls on this thing.
Yeah.
And then I'll look at the data and I know that exactly, you know, what I'm doing wrong and how to get back to it. So, like, I actually hit the ball pretty well last whatever Saturday when I played 9 holes, and I hadn't even touched the club in a long time.
Right.
So I think that's where this system, like, once you know what your faults are, you've measured them, and you get in there, and like you don't trial and error and fuck around with stuff.
Right.
And get on the wrong path for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I mean, it's a lot of the same feels I've had when I come in here and see you in the past.
Yeah.
I just got to get through the bad strikes. Especially when I get out on my own and I'm like, well, am I overdoing it or am I not doing it enough? Like, you know, like every lesson taker in the world.
Right.
Where it just,
in your, like, when
oh yeah.
you still have to get in there, you'll be like,
It's going to be a game changer.
Yeah.
The world's in trouble when I.
Right. And your goalie lock skills become so much more.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It's toey, but I think that's going to look better too. That's even faster. They're definitely not fat. And I'm going, like, as I get looser and looser now, I'll be at 95 in a second here.
Right. And it's interesting, like, the last one, the 2 swings ago, like, that vertical shot up a mile, like, it's in the middle of the tour average, really good. But as you're thinking about this, more torque's going up, too. Like, your first couple of torques were 88. That one was okay, 95. The one you chunked, 92. Okay, so yeah, torque's even going up a little bit here. 76 was that last one, so, or the one before we started chatting. Now it's 93, so this is kind of the side benefit. I'll bet you are getting more left foot shear out of that.
Yeah, that's what I feel. I actually feel when I get the more thoracic that it's almost like I'm spiking the left foot earlier and it allows me to push out. So that's
good. And
that club.
You're almost negative with the shear force, so it's moving in the right direction, for sure.
I was smoked.
What?
7.
That's crazy. You are getting a lot, like, that's way more vertical than you had in your full swing.
Yeah, that one I really just tried to push harder.
Previously, yeah.
That's one thing JD, like when I sent videos to JD every time and he was like, you gotta get taller.
Yeah. Because look at the difference between the first 60-degree wedge you hit.
Yeah.
150 to 168. That's where, I don't know if I told you, but when Rick brought me into UGP to work at college,
Yeah.
he was just shipping wedges to get warmed up, and they were like 220 vertical. And so,
Interesting.
if you produce vertical off the ground, eventually that ends up in the handle, and there's like an upward pull.
Right.
Which actually flattens out your
Right, that's the Como, like,
3D
yeah,
flat spot thing.
3D flat spot, yeah.
And so I would say for a 60, that's probably, well, I don't know. You'd have to ask Mayo what, but I feel like for strike quality, that's probably going to be a good deal.
Pretty good having the